Well, hello there. I am so glad to be with you this afternoon or morning, whatever time it is when you're watching this. Um, Happy New Year. I'm Dr. Pavini Moray. If we haven't met, I'm the founder of Wilcelium. And today we are discussing discrepancies in desire in relationships and why that can be so hard and why it's so hard to find balance. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about because literally every couple I have ever worked with in my career has dealt with this issue. It's in some way or another. So it's going to be a pleasure to be with you today. And we're going to move through a lot and cover a lot of material quickly. Really coming to a compassionate understanding of why these differences in desire exist, how you can navigate them with partners and staying out of conflict, and how you can be on the same team with partners about sex and this beautiful creative, pleasurable thing that we can do with our bodies, and that sometimes just gets so fraught. So that's what we're going to be covering. There's time at the end where you'll be able to ask all of your questions of me. I will give you my full attention and give you everything I've got. And I'll be telling you about more information about how at Wilcelium we work with couples. So Wilcelium is a queer and trans-led online learning community, really where we're teaching adults the skills that you need for lasting love. People who are really wanting healthy relationships, healthy connections, healthy sexualities, and how to sustain that, how to have relationships that are long-term, loving, and kind. And so every first Thursday of the month, we offer a free teaching on a relevant topic about sex and relationships. And so I do hope that you will make this just a regular part of your annual erotic self-care practice. And this will be together for an hour. It's a gift. It's a gift that you're giving to yourself to show up and be in dialogue with yourself and in thought dialogue and in conversation about sex and your sex and your sexuality, your relationship. So give yourself this gift fully. Go ahead, turn off your other devices. You can not check your text for an hour. It'll be fine. Close your other browser windows. Just this quality of presence, really giving yourself to that. At various times in today's presentation, I will be asking for your participation, and that means I'll be asking you to put things in the chat. This is, of course, up to you, consensual, but it really helps me as a teacher and educator to feel that engagement with students. And I think it helps you get a lot more out of it than just kind of like passively consuming a thing if you're actively engaged in it. We will also be doing a couple of practices so that this isn't just like talking head, blah, blah. It's actually you getting tools that you need that you can immediately apply in your life and relationship. So I'm talking today about relationships between two people. And this is all varieties of relationships, all sexual orientations, all configurations, legal, married, otherwise. You know, I'm not, there's no particular relationship that I'm speaking to. And I realize that there are lots of different kinds of relationships. I'm talking about ones right now with two adult sexual partners. And so basically this is just good information for anybody who's struggling with sex with a partner. And if you don't have a partner right now, that's okay, because like there's moments where you have struggled with desire, sex, libido, navigating discrepancy. I also want to say just now before we start that I come to this particular topic with a lot of compassion and empathy. This is something I have personally worked with and struggled with in my own relationships. My partner and I have a lot of history and healing and practice around this. And so wherever you are in this journey, it's okay. And I'm here for it and just supporting you and with lots of love and empathy. So why is it so freaking hard to find sexual compatibility in long-term relationship, right? Well, the simple answer is that you're two people, right? And that each of you has your own inner experience going on with your own libido and your own desire, and then throw the complication of relationship at it, and it gets tricky. So, I work with I work with a lot of couples, and I have for a long time. And so I'm going to talk about some of them. All of their names have been changed. They often are an amalgam of patterns that I see in people. So don't worry that there's nothing private being revealed here. But I think it's helpful to understand just how prevalent this is, how many people struggle with this. So let me tell you about Kego and Tiny. They argue about sex, and Tiny is someone who uses sex to affirm love, needs to really feel connected through having sex, through being physically intimate, has a really high libido, really enjoys sex, and can enjoy sex for hours and hours and hours, right? Tiny would like to have sex almost every day. And when that doesn't happen in the relationship, they feel really rejected. They'll pick fights when sex isn't happening at the desired frequency. Their partner, Kego, likes sex, and likes sex after all the household chores are done. Right, has a to-do list, and if that to-do list is crossed off, cool, we can have sex, honey. But really wants sex that lasts no more than an hour. They are a really busy human. Their sleep is really important to them, and they don't really want to have ooey gooey sex for hours and hours. Like, just get in, get it done. They realize that it's important for the relationship, but they also have a really hard time relaxing. They feel pressured by Tiny's constant demands for more sex. They would like ideally to have sex once or twice a month. So we have these two humans with really different styles, desire levels, of frequency, and kind of the reason that they're doing sex is different, right? So they only talk about it when they are fighting about it. Like, fighting about it is how they talk about it. And that has led to sexuality being a really charged topic. And this is how they landed in my office, right? They have both decided that Kego, the one who wants sex only once or twice a month, that person's the problem. They've both decided this, and that Kego needs to fix themselves, right? And want sex more often. That's the answer that they've come to. So just hold them in your mind and heart. We're going to come back to them a little bit later. But this is a pretty frequent pattern that I've seen in numerous couples. So, ideally, partnerships, you would have a partner and they would want sex exactly when you do, only when you do, right? With having sex drives that are exactly matched. And obviously that's unrealistic, right? Because, as I said, partnerships are made up of individuals. And I think besides that, the problem is that your libido isn't this monolithic fixed thing, right? It fluctuates. There's so many factors that impact your desire for sex. Stress, right? Stress is huge on libido. It has a lot of impact. Childbirth, grief, loss, illness, moving, changing a job, different medications can have impact on your libido. Mental health conditions, physical health conditions, getting a new job, global pandemics, right? All of these things impact just your libido, right? And then there's your partner's libido also being impacted by all of these things, right? And so it's not like you can be like, okay, well, cool, I have this partner who exactly matches me, right? Because it's just changing all of the time. And it's so normal for there to be these discrepancies in desire. And it can change who's wanting sex more often, right? People can kind of get stuck in a narrative of like, oh, this person is the higher libido, this person's the lower libido, but it can also flip-flop back and forth. And it's just like super normal for there to be these discrepancies. And in one study that I read that was done in 2015, 80% of couples experienced a desire discrepancy in the last month, right? So that's a lot. And if that's not happening right now, it might happen in the future, or it might have happened in the past. Typically, there is a consistency to it in that one person wants more sex, has a higher libido, and then the other. This can create a lot of tension in the relationship. But here's a fun fact for you. Most couples express more satisfaction with their sex life if they think they are having more sex than their friends. They just perceive that they're having more sex than their friends. They'll be more satisfied with their relationship. So you can also start to see that our satisfaction level with our sexuality is also not fixed, right? It's we're measuring it against other people, and that's happening on an unconscious level most of the time. So this is one of those moments for the participation. Your participation grade is happening now. So in your relationship right now or past, have you typically been the person with higher or lower libido? You can just type it in, higher or lower, and there's no right answer here, obviously. Great. It's about even what I'm seeing. Yeah. Higher, but not always, right? Yeah, I mean, it depends on who your partner is, right? And it depends on what's going on in their life, what's going on in your life. I've also been in both of those situations where I'm the one with the higher libido, and sometimes I'm the one with the lower libido, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sorry about that. You've been told you were wrong for having the lower libido. Super common, and like, ugh, it sucks, right? There's impact if it is kind of trending in one direction in your relationship, that you're usually this partner. There's impact on both people. The higher libido partner often feels like they're dealing with repeated sexual rejection. It can impact their self-esteem. They can start to feel guilty or ashamed of how much they're wanting sex, especially if they've been socialized as female. And they can be worrying that they're pressuring their partner. And so people who have lower libidos, the partner with lower libidos, is often really overwhelmed by sexual pressure. They feel pressured. Even if their partner isn't pressuring them, they sense it and they experience it as pressure. They can get really discouraged that they're not living up to their partner's expectations, that they're not being a good sexual partner, they're not performing, in the right ways. They can have a lot of shame that they're not as sexual as they're quote unquote supposed to be, right? And so in my experience, couples can develop a narrative of one of these, either the higher sex or the lower sex person, being the broken one. And then that person will show up in my office to get fixed, right? And it can really be either person. And the thing is, it doesn't work like that, right? Because we're talking about dynamics. We're talking about two people. Like if you're just alone with your libido, you're not thinking, oh, I have a higher libido or I have a lower libido, right? You don't care. You're just like, I'm living my life. But if you're in a partnership, that's when these measurements start to happen. And so I think the most important thing to note here is that it does not mean, a discrepancy in libido does not mean that there is a problem with either person in the relationship, right? So just take that in for a second. It's not a problem. It's just a discrepancy. There's an imbalance here. And often there are relational issues that are causing that discrepancy. And I'm going to tell you that in my experience, these fall into two categories. So it's pretty simple. One is not feeling safe enough. Don't feel safe enough with my partner to want to be intimate. And the other is feeling too safe. So that's confusing, isn't it? The thing is that there is this ever shifting balance between safety and risk. And safety really promotes security, calmness, relaxation, enjoyment, stability, right? And that's what safety promotes. And risk promotes excitement and arousal, novelty, change, interest, right? And so we as humans have this propensity for security. Obviously, we want to feel safe in our lives. We want to feel stable in our lives. We want to feel securely attached to our partner. And so what can happen in partnership is often the erotic risk part gets sacrificed for the safety part. And so people can just feel really, really safe and not so sexy, right? But we actually need both. We need to feel safe and we need to feel a tolerable amount of risk, erotic risk. And the thing is that they don't go very well in the moment together, right? It's like you kind of have one and then you have another and then you have one and then you have another. You don't really have those things at the same time. You can balance them, right? Like you can have safe risk, but they can get close, but they're not happening concurrently exactly, right? Same thing is true with togetherness and separateness. So couples who get into the too safe side of things are usually have some agreement around togetherness and separateness, and these are unspoken agreements, right? So they can be really, really together, like super together. You know what I'm talking about? You know those couples, right? They read each other's text messages. They're always together, or they can be really, really independent and separate. This is all having to do with your attachment styles. Too much togetherness equals a big mush mush, right? Everybody's just kind of like, whoa, like enmeshed and conflated, and there's not enough separateness. Too much separateness, it can create a lot of really hot sex, but the intimacy and connection that's needed to sustain long-term relationship can be absent, right? So this is just another pattern that people get into, and it might land familiar for you. Another couple I work with, Sarah and Mal, again, all these names are changed. Both of these people come from trauma backgrounds, and together they created this really stable, loving, communicative home relationship. They're super bonded. They trust each other with everything. Like their relationship is actually very, very, very healthy in many ways. Here's the problem. They're not having any sex. And this is an issue for them. And so I was speaking with Sarah privately, and I asked her about her attraction to Mal. And what she told me was that when they're out, like at a party, and she sees Mal from across the room, she's super attracted. And then back at home in the bedroom, she sees Mal and she feels safe and cozy. Right. And so every night they're cuddling, sleeping together, skin to skin, and they're really adamant that this is what they want and what they need, but they're really frustrated by this wall that's between them, that they can't be erotic together. And Sarah is masturbating frequently. So libido isn't the issue. There's not a libido discrepancy per se, but they're just not able to have sex, right? Because they've prioritized safety over being able to have any type of erotic risk in the relationship. And so that has kind of like strangleholded their sexual connection. So the first thing to do when talking about libido, this is the first thing that I do with couples, is like figure out what's actually going on, really assessing and getting to the bottom of like, what is the issue here, right? Because saying, oh, I have low libido, it's like a label, but it's not getting to like the what's going on part of it, right? So I'm gonna invite you to participate in a little bit of an assessment process right now. If you want to grab a pen and a paper, that would be good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. You don't have to answer the questions. You don't even have to answer them in your head. What I want you to do is make note of which questions hit home. Some of them are going to be like, oh, and some of them are going to be like, meh, you know. So just really notice anything that happens in your body when you hear that particular question. Just make a note of it. At the end, I'm going to ask you to put it into the chat, you know, what questions landed in your body. Cool? Great. So just take a moment here to find a comfortable body position. You can close your eyes if you want. Take a breath. Some of these may be a little bit activating, obviously. Are there unnamed resentments in your relationship? Just noticing how the question lands for you. Have there been things swept under the rug? Does one partner want to do nasty, dirty things and is too ashamed to name them? Does it feel too vulnerable to expose your desires to your partner? Are you too close and safe? Is there a medical issue? Are there unresolved issues from the past? Just take a breath here. Notice how your nervous system's doing. There's just a few more questions. And again, just noticing how the question lands for you. What's going on with consent? Can you talk openly about what you want? Are you still attracted to your partner? Are you having sex with yourself? Is trauma coming between you? What desires haven't been named? Have you become roommates and forgotten to see each other as sexual? Did having a kid really shift the dynamic? What hasn't been said? All right. Just taking a breath here into all of that. And just acknowledging the impact from those questions, whatever it was. Good, hard, neutral. And if you would, go ahead and type into the chat what landed for you. What questions did you feel the echoes in your body? unnamed resentments, too close and too safe. Oh, many people too close and too safe. Mm-hmm. Stuff swept under the rug, an ability to talk openly, too close and too safe. Yeah, it's interesting, huh? That this thing that we long for, the safety that we long for, and we get really good at creating, actually gets in the way of us having a hot sexual relationship, right? Trauma, stuff under the rug, what hasn't been said. Yeah, thank you. Roommates, resentments, not really attracted anymore. Yeah, good. Thanks, folks, for just being in that practice. And I know it's hard to look at this stuff and to say, okay, what's really going on here, right? It takes courage and it takes honesty to name it. And I encourage you to do that, because it's like, until it gets named, you can't really, and acknowledged, you can't really do anything about it, right? It's just like hanging out. And so this assessment process of like, okay, what's really in the way? Like, there's always going to be natural discrepancies in desire, right? Um, Most people at the beginning of their relationship have a lot of sex with their partner, and then that changes, right? And part of that is hormones and time, but there's like other stuff too, right? So there's how the ways that we create safety structures that really impact our erotic relationships. So I don't think it's a given that just because that those early days have passed, that like, never mind, just all downhill from here. I don't believe that, because it's not what's true in my relationship of 11 years. And it so let's talk a little bit about like what to do, what to do once you kind of like understand what's going on. And I personally work with a sex coach, right? I think it's great to get professional support around this. I give professional support around this. I think it's sometimes really hard to see what's going on. So you have a little bit of insight here. So let's talk a little bit about like, what can you do, right? So 4 things really come to my mind, and then we're going to go into the specifics of these. One is to introduce more risk. Duh, right? Introduce more separateness, like more moments of seeing your partner across the room and being like, "Ooh, okay, all right, hot." Getting on the same team, and I'll talk about that, and learning to talk more honestly about sex, right? So let's take these one at a time. So introducing more risk. Because most of us, we like the safety, right? So how can you introduce more risk? And I would say that like more risk and a little bit more separateness, and actually talking more honestly, all kind of weave together, right? So if you are willing to talk more openly about sex with your partner, if you are willing to name harder truths, that will automatically introduce more risk into your relationship. You do not need to, I mean, you can, well, I don't know if you can right now during COVID, but like you could go to a sex club and like have a really risky scene, or, you could like open your relationship. And those things do introduce more risk, right? But it's also the honesty of telling your partner, this is what I really want. I don't know how you're going to take it, right? I remember having to like hide my head under the covers to tell my partner something that I was wanting, because I was so like embarrassed, right? And we then had really hot sex after that. And the desire had nothing to do with my partner, right? And so just that the introduction of risk, like this is going to upset that the equilibrium that we have if I introduce this, right? So introducing a little bit more risk. How do I come up with that courage? How do I come up with the courage to take an erotic risk? What is an erotic risk for me, right? How could we have an erotic risk in our relationship? And it doesn't have to, when I'm saying risk, I'm not saying it has to be risky, right? Like you all get to determine what is acceptable level of risk for you. I'm not saying, go have unprotected sex in a parking lot with a stranger. I'm not saying that, but like how do you bring a little bit more of uncertainty in? Right? How do you bring in the like, I don't know how my partner is going to handle this. I don't know how my partner is going to handle it if I say I want this. I don't know how my partner is going to handle it if I ask for this. Right? It's just that act of introducing risk, right? And you can get support with this. Like you could have a friend support you. It doesn't have to be, the most risky thing, but just like play with a little bit of introducing little bits of risk, decided ahead of time, and then notice what happens when you take that risk, right? More separateness. If you introduce more separateness, this is getting a little bit more sovereign in your relationship, right? Having a few more boundaries in place of like, actually our time isn't always shared time. We have to plan our time together, right? So maybe we're together on Tuesday nights, and maybe on Wednesday and Thursday nights, like I'm doing my own thing, right? There's this in long-term relationship, there can just be this like collapsing into the relationship. And so introducing more separateness, giving yourself a chance to see your partner from across the room metaphorically, is taking back more of yourself, more of your own desires, your own friends, your own space, your own hobbies, your own activities, not just collapsing into the relationship. And that separateness will introduce just more hotness, right? Because it's like you fell in love with a person who was separate than you, and then you smush together. And now to stay in love with them, you have to actually separate a little back out, right? Getting on the same team means that you realize that it's less about each person's individual needs and more about like, okay, what is going to feed this relationship? Because people can get really polarized about this. Yeah, they can be like, well, I want to have sex 3 times a week and my partner only want to have sex once a month, and like, and then it becomes this competition of needs. So fuck that. Well, okay, how are we going to approach this? How are we going to get better at talking about sex? How are we going to get better at introducing more risk and separateness, right? This becomes a team effort. Like, oh, our sexuality matters. It's valuable. So let's us get on the same team about it. Okay, so those are kind of the broad swaths of navigating discrepancies in desire. Is more risk, more separateness, teaming, and speaking honestly. So let's talk a little bit more about just some other specifics of this. So frequency, right? If you do research on the internet on how to navigate your sexual discrepancy, what you were going to find, a lot of sex therapists say, is to find a compromise, right? For the person with lower libido to like raise their libido level up. I don't know. I mean, I think the problem with a compromise approach is that both people's needs still aren't being met. So like if we think back to Tiny and Kago, right? Tiny wants sex 3 times a week. Kago wants sex once a month. And if they find a compromise in that number, it's problematic because like Tiny's still not getting their needs that, and Kago is now having sex that they don't want to have, right? So it's not. I don't think compromise is the answer, right? Like finding that average of a frequency, right? But finding a frequency that is doable is key, right? And so, what is the frequency of sex that helps your relationship thrive, right? Because it does when we're feeling amorous and intimate with our partners, with our erotic partners, it's healthy. It supports the wellness of the relationship. So collaboration, experimentation, creativity, working together, these are getting you on the same page, so that this is a mutual project that you're working on, right? And you get to get really creative here with how how do you find an intimacy that works for both of you, right? So let's talk about that, because the redefining sex, right? Expanding what you mean by sex, because sex is not always about orgasm. It's not always about penetration. It's not always about genitals. There's couples define sex in a zillion different ways, and you get to define it how your partnership wants to, right? And so I think about, like, all right, well, what do we want our definition of sex to be? What's on the menu? Is kissing sex? Is mutual masturbation sex? Is holding hands sex? Is BDSM sex? Is using toys sex? Is watching porn together sex? Whatever is bringing you connection and pleasure, and feels consensual, and feels like, oh yeah, we're both here, we're both present in this experience, right? One great thing to put on this menu, I love this option, is masturbation. So the person who has a higher libido, like, what would it be like if you could masturbate in your partner's arms, like, and they could just be like holding you and loving on you and kissing on you, and you could be getting off, right? You could be having sex with yourself, and your partner's still there, and they're just like in that space with you. I think it's a really beautiful way for couples to have sex, where it meets both people's needs, but like, that's the kind of creativity that it takes, right? So yeah, I think having a menu, I'm going to talk a little bit about a strategy that Ari and I use, but another thing you might want to think about as you're thinking about your menu is, like, what's worked in the past for you? What were your successes, and then build on those successes. Think of a time that you had really hot sex with your partner, right? You think about that time, there are details that stand out to you, right? There are, if you think about why that was so hot, like, what made that so hot? What was that thing that made it so hot, right? And then those become details that you can take, not to recreate that experience, but if you're like, oh, like, it was because, we were like, we were out behind the we were out behind the work. We were out behind the work building, behind the dumpster. We were having sex behind the dumpster. Like, we were worried we were going to get caught. It was so hot, right? Like, okay, like, you don't have to go have sex behind a dumpster and worry you're going to get caught, but like, what are the things? What are the transferable skills that you can bring in? And this can another way to bring in more risk, right? Of building on your successes. What are those factors that made it so great? And how can you have those even in a different way, right? Another place that I see couples get really caught is in this goal-oriented, especially heterosexual couples. Oh my gosh, poor muffins. They get really hung up on orgasm and goal-focused sex. Like, it's only sex if both people come. Like, really? What about, people who can't come? Like, it's not sex? Like, sure, it's sex, right? Like, so how can you take that level, any layer of, like, this is what sex is supposed to be, and remove it? Slow down. Get out of that goal focus. Get out of those scripts that we all get into, right? This is what works, this, then this, then this. This is the order. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Like, what's it like to introduce curiosity? To come to a sex date and not know what's going to happen. Oh, that's some risk. That's some mystery. That's some novelty. That's some excitement, right? And so having a time, this is the thing that I said that I was going to tell you about, having a time where you have a date. My partner and I put it on the calendar. We have a weekly date on the calendar when we have our erotic time. And I just write down eros on the calendar. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what's going to happen when I show up to that time. And it's really about what are you showing up with and what I'm showing up with. And then we talk about it. Like, what would feel good? What would you like to do right now? What would I like to do right now, right? And having it on the calendar without having it be like as a defined, like this is what's going to happen, it gives a sense of spaciousness so nobody feels pressured. Our relationship is continually getting fed by the exchange of erotic energy. And it's playful and it's fun and it's always a surprise. We also, I mean, we're super geeky, so we like take notes about it. We construct experiments, we write it down, and then in our weekly meeting, we talk about it. So talking about sex, um, starting to bring that in, to normalize, like, oh, this is something that we talk about. Um, just like scheduling sex, schedule talking about sex, right? I think about, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Carol Dworkin, I think is her name, growth mindset lady, but she has a TED Talk. Growth mindset is the coolest thing ever because it says that you don't have to be good at a thing. You always get to be learning a thing. And there's endless possibility, right? And so, what is it to come to your sexuality with that? I don't have to know what I'm doing. I don't have to be good at this. And there's endless possibility, right? And so, that, and you can watch her TED Talk, you can read her book. It's great. But coming to talking about sex as a part of a growth mindset practice where, so every time Ari and I have Eros, then we have this talk. We have a weekly talking date with lots of agenda items, but Eros is one of them. Where we talk about like what was awesome, what was not awesome, what would we shift, what would we, anything come up, any learning come up out of that, right? We really see sexual intimacy as a place for us to do a lot of learning together as a couple. And it gets to be this place of endless exploration, right? And so like being in a growth mindset around that is pretty awesome. I would recommend, if you're going to try this approach, put it on the calendar for 6 months, whatever frequency and there's no right or wrong. It could be once a week, it could be once a month, it could be once every 2 months, whatever it is that you decide with your partner. Like, okay, honey, we're going to try this for 6 months. And then you show up, and you show up without an agenda. You show up without it being goal-oriented sex. And you come to that date fed, rested, embodied, meditated. You know, you have to talk about what's going to be the best time of day for you, right? Like for us, it's the mornings when we're fresher. For some people, it's the evenings. Whatever is better for you, right? And you just come to that date and you say, okay, what would you like to do today? Can I tell you what I'd like to do today? And then you talk about it. Like you just talk about the whole thing before it happens. This is going to feel edgy, especially in the beginning, especially if this is not your practice and you just want it to feel all organic all the time, right? Like who doesn't want it to feel organic? We all want it to feel organic all the time. Like, okay, but here's the truth of the matter. We're human and we got to like sometimes exert little effort for the things we want, right? So, put it on the calendar. Try this for 6 months. See what shifts, right? See what shifts when you are in a more conscious practice. And then the person who has higher libido knows, like, cool, I know that I'm going to get to have sex with my partner, sex, whatever that is that we define together. I know I'm going to get to have sex with my partner every 2 months. Like, I know that that's going to happen. I don't have to wonder. I can masturbate in between. I can, I can explore my sexuality in other ways in between. The person who has the lower libido also knows, like, okay, cool. Like I can prepare for that. I can mentally prepare. Whatever that frequency, whatever that rhythm is. But I think that the important thing is that you're talking about it, right? Because you just don't want to miss these opportunities to learn from each other. One question that I really love is, what would you most like to experience with me sexually? What would you most like to experience with me sexually? So you can talk about that, right? And that also might change with time. So just in conclusion today, we're going to have some time for Q&A here in just a minute. It's both partners' responsibility to collaborate and to communicate about how to maintain a sexual relationship that can sustain the relationship that works for both of them. It's not always going to be perfect. Libidos are not always going to be the same. They shift, they fluctuate, especially in long-term relationship. We talked about that. But with your creativity, with your empathy, with your teamingness, with your willingness to explore a little bit more risk and a little bit more separateness, this is something that you manage. It's not something that you solve. This is like a challenge that you get to be in, right? Of like, how do I get to be a sexual person in long-term relationship, with this other sexual person in long-term relationship? It's a challenge that you get to be in for the duration of the relationship, which hopefully is long. So just like, I think setting your sights with this isn't a one and done problem. It's this getting into this growth mindset about, I'm prepared to engage with my sexuality for the rest of my life. So, that was a lot. Folks doing okay out there in internet land? Yeah, good. Who wrote these? Wonder who wrote the questions down. Thank you so much for writing down all the questions that I asked you. That's awesome. Great. I really appreciate that. Cool. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about the work that I do at Wilcelium with couples. We work with couples in a variety of ways, both in small groups, in classes, and one-on-one. We do intensives. And so the heart of it is helping people getting into these creative and thriving relationships that are fun. Getting out of like the stiffness and the stuckness into the expansiveness, the creativity, really making relationships that are egalitarian, where the power is balanced, where people feel like their full selves, they feel like they get to bring their whole selves and change and grow. And so our take on it is that this happens through play and practice and talking about it, learning new skills, that there's nothing that in relationship that should not be able to be talked about and played with. And so really, like, what are those core skills that we all need to be really thriving and happy? And so that's the work that we're doing is helping couples. We have a container that starts at the end of January. That's a year-long container. That is called the Well Couple course, and that is a wraparound support, comprehensive curriculum and practicing and group processing and all the kinds of support. We do couples intensives. We design things especially for people sometimes. Lots of different ways that we're working with couples to help you have, really awesome relationships. I'll just say that, like, my partnership, I've been with my partner for 11 years. It's not always easy, but it is always kind and it's always supportive. Usually it's fun. And that's the commitment that I have, is to building a world of relationality that is sustained by relationships, by people knowing how to be in harmonious relationships. So I am going to put a link here into the chat, because if you are interested in working with me, with Wilcelium, the next step is to fill out a short application. And if we think we can be helpful to you, I'm going to stick it in here, right, so you can see it. Don't leave right now yet, because I want to answer your questions. If we think we can be helpful, we'll reach out. If we think we can't be helpful, we'll reach out and let you know that. But then we just have a conversation, and both you and your partner show up, and it's with me, and you talk to me, and I listen really deeply and hear what is going on, and let's get to the bottom of it, and let's figure out, like, a path forward, whether that's with us or not. It's okay, but, like, let's just talk about it and see, what is needed for you to have a really beautiful, loving, delightful relationship. So that's the link to fill out the form, and then we'll be in touch. Yeah, I think that's it. So I want to take this time now. You have my full attention, and tell me what your questions are. Let me help support you in your relationship. And if you would put them in the chat, oh, great. You already had yours ready to go. So I'm just going to read it. My partner no longer feels safe with me. They feel like our erotic bond has died. Even when we have sex, they often don't feel connected to their eroticism or to me. Is there a way for me to help rekindle their sense of safety? Um, no, that's the answer. You cannot rekindle their sense of safety. You can support them in rekindling their own sense of safety. You can do the things that are on your side of the street, and it's on your partner to do the work, to say the things, to ask for what they need, to make requests, to set boundaries. And that's probably going to be work that they do with a therapist, to even figure it out, because it's like our sense of safety cannot rest in someone else, right? I mean, we can try, but it's just a fail. Like that's, often we're in relationship, we're trying to heal whatever relationship wounds we have from the past, mostly from our upbringing and past relationships, right? And so we like to think that we can outsource our safety. Well, if you would just do this, then I would finally feel safe, right? No, like I need to be able to make requests. Please don't do that. If you do that, I will do this, right? And we create our own sense of safety by building trust with our experience, by believing ourselves, by trusting ourselves. And so I think, yeah, I would say that there's work that your partner needs to do on their own, and then there's work that you need to do together. Of like, okay, what were the violations, or what happened that they with you particularly, that created this sense of unsafety for them, and that might be from now, and it might be stuff from the past, and probably it's both. Right. And you can only own your part, right? You can be willing to make repair. You can be willing to clean up anything on your side of the street, but you cannot make them feel safe. So I'm sorry. And I mean, I think you knew that probably already, but it's a great question, right? What else? What other questions do folks have? And let me know if that was helpful too. Okay. Oh, this is great. I circumstantially stopped having sex with cis men 2 years ago and now realize I'm no longer to have heteronormative sex after such an extended period of time outside the patriarchy matrix. What a great phrase. At the same time, I still have a lot of internalized homophobia and transphobia that gets in the way of me being attracted to literally any gender. What do I do? Yes. I mean, I think it's beautiful that you can see it and name it. I think all that stuff that we internalize from the culture that we're living in, right? All of the fat phobia, transphobia, misogyny, all of that bullshit that gets inside of us, whether we want it or not, it has to be continually weeded out, right? It's the biggest practice that I have around it is transparency and vulnerability. Honesty, I name it. I name it to myself, and I name it to others, not to the to the person who it might do harm to, right? But to, if I notice that I've had a racist thought, for example, I have a commitment, like I have to talk about that with my therapist, and same with any of the other isms. It's just like I don't have that expectation of myself that that's not going to come up, because I don't think that that's kind. I think it is, because it is going to come up because it's what we're living in. And when it does come up, how do I want to be with myself? Okay, I'm going to be compassionate, and I'm going to be what's that word? Oh, there's a particular word I'm looking for, but it's like not ruthless, but it's like just like completely in integrity around how I handle it, right? And I think the other thing I think is really cool that you can do is, and I got this advice from a fat activist, is like, if you're having fat phobia, like make sure you're following fat people on Instagram, like make sure you're looking at their lives and their pictures, and that's the primary thing you're seeing in your feed. And so I might say that the same technology could work here, of like, who are you looking to? Who are you bringing into your world? What queer bodies, what trans bodies are you celebrating, and really making sure that that's what you're seeing a lot of. so that your desires can find not acceptance, but like home, like, oh yeah. And validation, that's the word I'm looking for, like really finding validation for those beautiful desires. So give that a go for a few months. And like also, like I find it's really helpful to be clear about what I'm not willing to let into my feed, either social media or just in general, like what am I surrounding myself with? What am I reading? What am I listening to? What kind of music am I listening to? I don't listen to white straight men anymore on Spotify, um, just because like, and not, there's much music that I love by white straight men, and I just don't want to listen to it right now because I want to protect a space that's cultivating and curating different affinities. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. How to navigate differing sense of security stemming from cultural norms. One partner finding a great deal of security in traditional relationship structure versus other finding that structure to be threatening. Yeah, I think you're probably talking here about monogamy, non-monogamy, but I'm guessing. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like what underpins that often is around attachment. And I think like the relationships that we crave, the kind of relationships that we crave, are often based around our attachment patterns and what makes us feel comfortable, right? And so I wonder if it's would be helpful to get at it through that lens, right? If like, okay, what do I know about my own attachment style, my own attachment history? And what do you know? And okay, how are we going to create attachment together? Because it's like what you're talking about is like those are the structures. Like if it is indeed monogamy and non-monogamy, right? We're like, okay, these are the structures that we're going to use to meet these attachment needs, right? If this is the case. And so like, can we just get at what the actual needs are without having to bring in the strategies, the structures, right? So that might be one way to start to have conversations where you're on the same team about it, rather than my way or your way, right? It's like, okay, what do we both need to feel secure in this relationship, right? And before we put that layer of like, okay, this is the structure or the container of the relationship, yeah. Okay, I think we have time for this last question. I haven't had sex with cis men in many years. Now I'm dating a cis man again, and it's very scary because I don't trust that his relationship to sexuality won't harm me. How do I differentiate between my fears about his behavior and his actual behavior? Yeah, that's so good. My sense about this one is slowness. Take your time. Take all the time you need. And the practice of going slow and naming what's coming up. Like you can say to him, you can say, oh, I noticed that I'm feeling grabbed right now, like, and I'm not sure if it's my fear or if it's something that's actually happening, so can we just slow down and explore a little bit, and you can talk with him ahead of time about that. And I'm sure he's if you're dating him, I'm sure he's pretty awesome, and so he's probably going to be willing to help unpack this, because I think that there's going to be a flip side to it as well of I see some of the hard things that cis men live with, and that's one of them is, am I going to do harm with my sexuality, right? And so like having a chance to like co-creatively work on that could be really powerful and beautiful if you can get language around it and on the same page about it. Like I think that could be really healing for both of you, um, and to really make sure that each move that you are making separately and together. I'm just reminded of that Rumi poem, like "Don't move the way fear makes you move," right? And it's like that of like, how do you make sure that each move that you're making together, sexually, romantically, intimately, is authentic? And that's just going to take slowness, and it's going to take listening, and being willing to really talk about it. Yeah, I hope that helps. Cool. All right, folks. Yes. Practicing saying no and seeing that being honored has been healing. Yes. Yeah, that really builds trust, right? We say a thing and somebody's like, cool, thanks for telling me. Yes. Like, oh, all right, that just built some trust with me. So there's the link again, so that you're free to copy the link and open another browser tab now. But really, if you are interested in working together, I really encourage you to get together and talk with me about it. I want to talk with you and your partner. And let's see how we can build you a really beautiful relationship. So I'm Dr. Pavini Moray for Wilsilium, just wishing you so much pleasure and breath in this new year. Bye, everybody.